Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. This may come as no surprise, but I was one of the many kids in the late 90s and early 2000s that faithfully watched the Cartoon Network block known as Toonami. Some of my fondest childhood memories include the times my sister and I would come home after school and immerse ourselves in the action and humor of such classic anime as Voltron, Sailor Moon, Yu Yu Hakusho, Tenchi Muyo, and of course, the Dragon Ball franchise. Another reason I enjoyed the block is that sometimes, in between shows and commercials, Toonami would show a quick review of a newly released video game. That's how I found the first game of this series, and I think I can honestly say that it is one of the few that I've bought almost completely blind. The TV review gave an extremely brief synopsis and showed less than a minute's worth of footage, but aside from the bright colors, random visuals, and downright weird gameplay, I was thinking, cutest main character ever. Here is the universally quirky game series, Katamari, released from March 2004 to the present and rated E for everyone for some mild fantasy violence. As of 2017, the main collection is comprised of 6 games plus some spin-offs, but I will be referring to just the first 2 since they were the ones I grew up with. The word Katamari translates in English to mass, cluster, or clump. The first game, Katamari Damacy, roughly means clump of souls. Why? It all begins when the king of all cosmos has a little too much fun one night. His mind swimming in a drunken stupor as he soars with unabashed glee across the sky. He crashes into and knocks out every star in the universe as if they were light bulbs. On top of that, he even obliterates the moon. After finally sobering up and seeing the colossal mess he's made, the king vows to take responsibility for his actions by charging his son, the prince, to fix the problem. As the prince, the player is ordered to take a highly adhesive ball called a Katamari down to earth and roll up literally every single thing that he can find until the Katamari is one giant ball of stuff. The king can then turn these balls of stuff into new stars and thereby restore the light in the heavens, taking the credit for himself, of course. A side story focuses on the Hoshino family on Earth, with the children noticing the subtle and not so subtle evidence of the prince's work, while the parents remain densely unaware. In the aptly entitled sequel, We Love Katamari, the king has become so popular following the events of the first game that he orders the prince to appease his fans by rolling up Katamaris with whatever they request, however they request it, no matter how ridiculous or stupid it sounds. In another side story, players witness the untold history of the king, presented with all the melodramatic cliches of a, quote, classic coming-of-age tale. The series was developed by Namco, the company behind the 80s classic Pac-Man. And like Pac-Man, according to lead developer Keita Takahashi, Katamari was made with 4 key elements in mind: novelty, ease of understanding, enjoyment, and humor. The end result has all of these in spades. Here is a quote from the first game's back cover. Play is controlled with the analog sticks, with no buttons to press or combos to cause distress. I've always found the phrasing of this statement both amusing and fascinating. There are many who avoid video games due to the intricacies of controller coordination. I can certainly imagine how this would be difficult for those who didn't grow up playing video games and get the necessary practice on the controller. These games, however, are meant to be highly user-friendly without easing up on the challenge. As the levels and overall games progress, you use increasingly larger Katamaris in order to roll up increasingly larger objects, from tiny things like thumbtacks, erasers, and silverware, to small animals like mice, cats, and dogs, to larger objects and creatures like furniture, livestock, and people, to huge objects like buildings and islands. The general objective of most levels is to get your Katamari to a designated diameter within a given time limit. Other levels may have different objectives, like rolling up a great amount of a particular object, or bringing your enlarged Katamari to a specified location in the level before time runs out. I especially like the fact that even if the tiny prince is invisible next to a comparatively large Katamari, an image of the prince is always shown in the lower right corner of the screen, moving according to the Katamari's maneuvering. Here, we can really appreciate what a little trooper he is by the way he runs as if in a marathon, moves sideways with arms outstretched like a traffic cop or construction worker, or nearly drops to his knees when slowing a speeding Katamari down, his adorably determined face scrunched up and red as he strains under the effort. Now, I'm sure at this point many of you are thinking that age-old question, what were they smoking? But just you wait, it gets better. The king of all cosmos looks like a stereotypically gay version of the Burger King mascot, a muscular, cleft-chin humanoid with a gold crown, purple tights, and a large Elizabethan collar, as well as, like all his kind, a vibrant cylinder-shaped head. A major show-off and a hero in his own mind, he is also unbelievably passive-aggressive toward his son, always lamenting about his puny size of 5 centimeters. No, seriously, the prince is only 5 centimeters tall, and supposed lack of sense compared to the king's own. Moreover, and again I'm not kidding here, the king's in-game speaking voice is the scratching sound of a DJ's record, but you wouldn't know from that his dialogue consists mostly of just over-the-top ranting. Here are some of the king's lines to the prince, preceding the first level of Game 1. Here we are, Earth, full of things as usual. Ack! So small. You're as small as ever. We didn't notice, not one jot, what with the stars and all. What is that? That body? That physique? Could you really be our son? Aha! I've got it. Build yourself up while you roll the Katamari. Work out and get bigger. Yes, indeed. Don't presume to take the escalator up to the throne just because you're the prince. Ooh, tangent. But the prince isn't entirely alone. He also has cousins, the number of which keeps increasing with each game, not unlike the species of another Japanese game franchise I could name. Like the king, they speak in noises rather than words, these sounding like bits of alien gibberish spoken in severely distorted chipmunk voices. Though they all share the same basic size and cuteness as the prince, each have different shapes, colorings, and personalities. And like any other collected objects, once the cousins have been rolled up in a Katamari, yes, you can do that, and I swear that in itself is a major treat. The player can access the collection menu and read their descriptions, made all the funnier because they are in the king's own words and their supposed interests and quirks have next to nothing to do with the game proper. Just to name a few of my favorites, there is the prince, of course, with a solid green body and purple legs. According to the king, the prince is growing stronger and more mature every day. Still very small, though. There's La, said to be naked due to her solid tanned flesh color. A true free spirit, hating even the confines of clothing. Some call it exhibitionism. Dip, black but covered in flashing strobe lights. A cousin who sparkles a lot and gets carried away with things. We wish he knew the difference between sticking out and just being a nuisance. Opio, chronically mummified in bandages and a leg cast. He looks ill all the time, but contrary to his sickly appearance, he has an intense vitality. Miso, red with a bowl-shaped head which is empty in Game 1, but filled with soup in Game 2. A cousin with a smell we find very relaxing. She isn't very good at strenuous exercise, though. Kineko, basically a mushroom with limbs. A slightly annoying second cousin who kicks up lots of dust whenever she moves, so she doesn't move much, out of courtesy. Twinkle, very pointy due to his star-shaped figure. A second cousin who damages things just by walking around, including himself, but he's still a nice guy. And Natsuo, who looks like a blue-striped peanut. This second cousin's hands could never ever reach his face. We wonder how he eats his food. Ironically, the cosmic beings are pretty natural-looking compared to the Lego-like creatures of Earth. Their bodies sharply angular, their heads like cubes with creepy doll-like faces painted on them. One of the few times they really show any life is when they run away, screaming in terror, before a massive Katamari charges at them like a hilariously bad B-movie monster. And all of this seen and done to a soundtrack that's as nonsensical, disjointed, and kaleidoscopic as everything else in the game. There's the smooth Sinatra-esque Que Sera Sera, the frantic ecstasy of Katamari Mambo, the calm innocent charm of Cherry Tree Times, the head-banging joy of Everlasting Love, the wistful and surprisingly somber-sounding Blue Orb, and whatever the heck Kuru Kuru Rock is. This is without a doubt one of the most absurd pieces of fiction of any media ever conceived, never mind that I personally have ever seen. But that's what makes them such feel-good games. Addictive, charming, and almost guaranteed to put a smile on the faces of players and observers alike. Whether you consider it the acid trip it appears to be, or simply a refreshing change from the American norm of interactive experiences. As for me, I think Katamari is living proof of how in art and storytelling it is sometimes better to ask, why not, rather than, why? Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you.